Shabbat Shalom, everyone, from Irving, Texas. And I thought it would be a good time to give them a message. Call it a message, call it a study, call it what you will. Concerning Passover, because with Passover coming up, after all, we're only a couple of months out of Passover already. And it's not too early to consider beginning to take a reevaluation of ourselves, look ourselves in the mirror a bit, and maybe take some spiritual leavening out. But nonetheless, that's not really what this message is about today so much. We may touch on that a bit, but truly not so much. Because here's why. There's a common teaching in many churches today concerning the relevancy of the high days mentioned in Scripture for today's followers, today's believers. Should we keep them at all? To how exactly do we keep them? And all sorts of questions concerning them. And the most common thought seems to be, amongst these people, amongst many churches, is that Yahshua's, the first coming of Yahshua is reflected in spring holy days, the spring high days, the ones coming up, and then the ones regarding in the fall are regarding his second coming, his return, his final return, if you will. I prefer to use the phrase the final return or the final coming as opposed to the second coming. I don't feel it's a second coming is an evil term. I just feel it's a misnomer. That's all. But nonetheless, and then of course there are those that say that, well, he did away with them all. He's our Passover. He's this, and he did it all for us, so we don't have to do. No. Those people don't know the Bible from a phone book. I'm sorry. But nonetheless, but what about this idea, this concept that the spring days reflect his first coming, and as we go through the year, fall days reflect his final coming? My idea is I advise you to reject both schools of thought. Again, my advice is to advise you to reject both schools of thought because I don't believe either one is true. Because when you look back over the life and ministry of Messiah, all the days, the ones in the spring, the ones in the fall, do in fact look back, all of them. Look back. They look back to his first coming, his first appearance on earth, during his earthly ministry, during the time we read of in the Gospels. Also, they all look forward to his final return, all of them. So to say that one reflects just his first coming, his earthly ministry, and the second and the fall ones reflect his final coming is at best it's a huge misunderstanding. Because I'm going to spend today covering Exhibit A. And it's called Yahshua's Return and Passover. Again, Yahshua's Return and Passover. Because there is a connection between his final coming and the Passover. And we're going to touch on something else that's very common teaching here momentarily, here shortly, and I'll advise you to reject it as well, and I've got my reasons laid out here. Now, to start with, this is not to insist that Yahshua will return on the Passover, on the day of Passover. Now, why do I say that? Because to start with, we're talking types here. And one thing we have to remember about types, when you're talking about his first coming, during his earthly ministry, and his final coming, all these high days have their own unique piece of the puzzle in regard to both. And it's a type. And what's the number one thing we need to remember about types? Remember, I'm saying he's not coming on Passover, though someone could make a case for it. Types are inherently imperfect. Because they point to a perfect fulfillment. Like we just said, each high day points to his return in its own way, with its own very unique piece of the puzzle. This includes Passover. I mean all of them. Passover, the high days of unleavened. How about first fruits? Yes. Pentecost? Absolutely. Feast of Trumpets? Yeah, absolutely. So do trumpets and the Feast of Tabernacles. All of them. But why am I saying that that I'm not specifically saying, anyone want to take a guess on why I would dare to say something like, I'm not saying he is slated to return on Passover or any other of these days? Anybody? Daniel?
It's forbidden. Yahshua himself said, I don't even know.
Well, you know what, Daniel? You're right. You win the prize. That is the correct answer. We are told. Start with we were told how he returned. And first off, we are told no one knows the day or the hour. So I want to understood perfectly. I am not setting dates. If anyone is setting dates, I have a problem with them, and so should you. Let's try. No one knows the day or the hour. Now, we're going to review a couple of scriptures pertinent to this, because there's another teaching I find every bit as alarming, if not even more alarming, more disconcerting than the ones I just brought up in my opening. Let's turn to Acts 1, please. First off, actually, can we try Matthew 24:36, please? Let's go there first. Matthew 24, verse 36. I think most of y'all know what that says already. But we'll review it all the same. Regarding the coming of the Son of Man, his return. But of that day and that hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. A very similar remark is made in Mark 13:32. Let's flip there, please. Mark 13:32. Again, this is when the disciples asked him about, just like they did in Matthew 24, when they asked him about when they asked the question in verse 4, it said, well, when will these things be, and what will be the sign when all these things will be fulfilled? Matthew 13:32. But of that day and that hour nobody knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Can it get any plainer than that? I don't think so. Let's try Acts, because after Yahshua's resurrection, and he comes to pay them a visit shortly before Pentecost. Acts 1, please. Let's pick it up in verse 6. I believe that's what I have down, verse 6. Yeah, verses 6 and 7. Therefore, when they had come together, they asked me, here we go with the same question. Master Adonai, will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? They still didn't get it, did they? He gives them the same answer. Now, he tells them everything he knows here, right? No. He gives them the same answer he gave earlier already. Verse 7, he said to them, it is not for you to know the times for which the Father has put his own authority. Again, only the Father knows. Now, what is this teaching that anyone wondering? Anyone ask me, what is this teaching that I find so disturbing concerning these passages? These last three verses we read in Matthew 24 and Mark 13 and in Acts 1. Anyone? Okay, I don't hear anyone asking me what that is. What that is. Okay, Daniel, good enough. Because it's a very common teaching, and it's being accepted more and more, not just in the Sunday churches, but also in Sabbath-keeping churches. That's what's got me alarmed. It's a teaching that, well, this applies only to the Feast of Trumpets. Because he's slated and he's scheduled to come back on the Feast of Trumpets. Now we're making some connections here on why I advise you to reject the idea of his first coming being in the spring and the connection between his final coming being in the fall. Well, he's slated, he is scheduled. I've heard it with my own ears, people I know personally. He is scheduled to return on the Feast of Trumpets. But that's the day and the hour that nobody knows, so we don't know exactly when it is because we don't know how to calculate the Feast of Trumpets. That's why it's secret. Anyone see the problem with that? Anyone want to take a rip? What's the problem with it?
Same answer. It's forbidden.
Okay.
And it says
Anyone else? All right, Daniel.
Also says, and it's one of our hymns, that the Feast of Tabernacles on the year of Jubilee.
Well, I got a couple questions. Personally, I have a couple questions. In the years, I have a couple questions about that. If we can calculate all the other new moons of the year, how come we can't calculate the seventh one? I mean, that's one of the first things that occurred to me. Second question, something a bit more serious. How about, can anyone say it? Can we say atonement? 1, 2, 3, everybody. 1, 2, 3. Atonement. What happens on atonement? We fast. We humble ourselves. We afflict ourselves. What happens if we don't? We are, thank you, Quran. Yes, we are cut off. And if that's also the same day that the high priest was to enter the most holy place and present his sacrifices for himself, for his household, and for the people. Now, if he goes in there any old time in any old way, what happens to him? He's dead. He's a goner. I can think of a couple of guys named Nahab and Abihu. So the high priest was supposed to go there only one day a year. And now a question. If we can't calculate, if it is impossible to calculate the first day of the 7th month, Feast of Trumpets, can we reasonably calculate the Day of Atonement? No. We can't reckon that either. So the teaching, and the implication of that teaching is that Yahweh would in fact It's an unstated implication. I mean, most of these people that teach this don't understand what they're saying, in regard to what I'm about to say here. They're presenting a mighty being, Yahweh, that would leave the high priest and the people's lives just dangling on getting it right, on getting atonement just right. Because if you can't calculate the first day, you can't calculate all the other days in between either. And you can't calculate atonement. You cannot reckon atonement. Tom.
A little bit of food for thought.
And this is not meant to be a contrarian to all of this, but when we read in the evaluation of those in Asia Minor, ancient Turkey, and it's for us today as well, let him who has ears, let him hear what the Spirit is speaking to, plural, the assemblies, right on down to the ages. Revelation 3 and verse 1 says, and to the set apart messenger of the assembly in Sardis, right? These things which he that has the 7 spirits of Elohim and the 7 stars. I know your works, that you have a name, that you live, paradox, and are dead. What? Be watchful and strengthen the things which remain that are ready to die. They're not dead yet. For I have not found your mitzvos, your works, complete or perfect before Yahweh. Verse 3 of Revelation 3. And I'll pause and say, we're supposed to watch and pray always, so we might be accounted worthy to escape all these things that are coming in a time of trouble, since it was not since the beginning of the world, Yahshua says, they're ever going to be again. The Metzering, the tribulation, coming upon planet Earth. Revelation 3:3 says, remember therefore you have what you received and heard, hold fast, hang on. And to Yahshua, repent, turn back to me. For therefore, if you therefore shall not watch, I will come upon you as a thief, like a thief in the night, and you shall not know what hour I will come upon you. There are concepts having to do with days and hours, and then there is this watch of the time in which you're living. We know that there are those that read in 2 Peter, they're going to be mockers, saying, where is the sign of this coming? And all things continue since the beginning of the world. So there is a challenge to us not to know the day or the hour, apparently. It's in the Father's hands only, as you have aptly pointed out. But we're supposed to have a watchful, diligent spirit, and there'll be a time coming when those that have the mentality of Sardis, and we at one time or another all may fall into that evaluational category. We will not know, and the time will come when we will be given revelation knowledge. But if I understand it, it's not now. It's not right now.
But we don't know when that's going to be either.
I just said that.
I know, you're correct. We're on the same page.
Yeah,
But we are to watch for signs.
exactly.
We are to watch for the signs. That is the instructions, to watch for the signs. And we're also told how he will return. Now, how is this important? Why is it important to know and understand how he will return? I think we'll get there shortly. On how Messiah will return. I don't have these written down in order, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to put them together in order so we can put these together front to back. Let's go to Deuteronomy 33. So it's not impossible that I miss one. Doing this, I did not. I just wrote them down in the order in which I found them. So I'm going to try to do these in order from front to back. Deuteronomy 33, verses 26 and 27. I would have said, I will dash them into pieces, and I will make them a memory to cease from amongst men. Had I not feared. Wait a minute, I'm in 32. No wonder it didn't sound right. 33. I'm sorry. That didn't not sound right. Deuteronomy 33. I was in 32. 33, 26 and 27. There is no one like the Elohim of Jeshurun. Jeshurun being a reference to Jerusalem. There is no one like the Elohim of Jerusalem, or the mighty one of Jerusalem, Jeshurun, who rides in the heavens to help you, and his excellency on the clouds. The eternal Elohim is your refuge, and underneath are the everlasting arms. He will thrust out the enemy from before you, and will say, destroy. So back up to verse 26. What do we read here? He's riding. He rides. He rides the heavens to help you, and his excellency on the clouds. So he comes riding back on the clouds. Are these clouds literal or figurative? Actually, Scripture will tell us as we go through these. Let us please try Psalms 68, verse 4. Let's turn to Psalms, please. Psalm 68. Let's try for verse 4. Sing unto Elohim, and sing his praises unto his name. Extol him who rides on the clouds, by his name Yah, and rejoice before him. Now this was one of the scriptures that was a game changer for me several years ago when I was first studying the names. But the big one was Proverbs 30, verse 4.
Oh, yes.
That was the big one for me. This one did have it. Don't get me wrong. This one did have its place. But Proverbs 34 was the one that just smacked me in the head like a 2x4. I'm in Psalm 68, verse 4.
Psalm here,
Psalm 68.
6,
68.
6,
6, 8.
No comprende.
muy bien, muy bien.
El country boy no comprende. Psalm 68, verse 4. Now, remaining in Psalms, let's go a few pages over to Psalm 104. Psalm 104, verse 3.
The chariot.
Mm-hmm. Now we're getting somewhere, because we know he's riding. We know he comes riding in, and he's riding in on clouds. Now, Psalm 68. Psalm 104, verse 3. Actually, I want to back up to verse 2. This might a little context I think might be helpful. O Yahweh my Elohim, you are very great, and you are clothed with honor and majesty, who cover yourself with light as with a garment. Will stretch out the heavens like a curtain. Cover yourself with light as with a garment. That's going to play into it too when we turn to Revelation, but not yet. He lays the beams of the upper chambers in the waters, and he makes the clouds his chariot. Who walks on the wings of the wind? Who makes his angel spirits, and his ministers are a fire of flame. So he makes the cloud his chariot. So now we get these clouds are symbolic for chariots. He's riding in. He comes riding back. He's riding in on a chariot. Now, how does a chariot work? What is it you put a Hemi 308 on, a 308 Hemi on it, right?
Come on, man.
Okay, a 416. No. You tie it to a horse. You take a chariot, you tie it to a horse. Some real horsepower. Revelation 19, let's pick it up in verse 11. Because now we're going to read about some real horsepower. This is going to help tie every bit of this together. And it's going to take out a lot of guesswork. Revelation 19, we're going to pick it up in verse 11. We're going to go through verse 21. Revelation 19, 11 through 21. Now I saw heaven open. We saw heaven open. Remember what we just read in Psalm 104? About the clouds rolling back, sky rolling back. Now I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. And he who sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges, and he makes war. And his eyes were like a fire flame, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written on him except that no one knew except himself. And he was clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of Yahweh. And the armies in heaven, clothed in fine linen, white and clean, followed him on white horses. So we're seeing a cavalry charge like we've never seen before. Move over, John Wayne. And now out of his mouth goes a sharp sword, that he should strike the nations. That with it he should strike the nations. And he himself will rule them with a rod of iron. And he himself treads the winepresses of the fierceness and the wrath of Yahweh El Shaddai. And on his name he has and he has on his robe and on his thigh a name written, the King of Kings and the Master of all masters. Now, how is it and why is it important that we know how he returns? Okay, Daniel, you got your hand just went up very quickly. Take a rip at it.
Well, if we recognize what it is, then we'll also recognize what it is not.
There you go.
Other ways, either way, yeah.
There you go. Yes. It's to keep yourself deception proof. Somebody else coming in another way is not entering in by the gate of the sheepfold, is he?
If they say he's in the desert, don't go.
There you go, Matthew 20. That's right. Oh look, there he is. He's out yonder in the desert. Don't believe it. He's in the secret places. Don't buy into it. Don't believe it. If he's here, this, that, some other place, no matter what they say, do not believe it. Believe what we just read here. Because that is everything you're going to hear said that Yahshua warned us about. Don't believe this, don't believe that. It's very contrary to what we just read here. The idea is to keep ourselves deception proof. That we don't fall into temptation, don't fall into deception. Tony.
It says he has a robe dipped in blood. Why is his robe dipped in blood?
He's striking in part because he is striking the nations. He returns as a warrior. He's been in battle.
His wrath. His outpouring of his wrath.
That's talked about in a lot of detail. In Ezekiel 37. About the destruction of Esau and other nations.
That's right.
Yes,
Yeah,
Tino.
Yeah, it's a sign of war. That's the war. That's the sign that he just went to war, or there is shedding of blood, so that you can tell that it matches all up to what is happening in this picture of how Yahshua is going to return. What is he coming to return to do? He's bringing judgment. So
That's right.
That's where all this is coming from.
Bringing war and judgment. You are spot on, Tino.
I would like to read something real quick in Ecclesiastes 3.
Feel free.
All of this reminded me
Please
of this
do.
when I was going through it, but it's about the timing. Like you were
Okay.
mentioning. So I'm not going to read the whole chapter here, but if you read from verse 1, and then you come down to just this, just this idea about the time in verse 8, and I just want to read a few scripture passages. Verse 8 says this: "It's a time to love and a time to hate, a a time of war and a time of peace. We know that whenever this happens, like we read in Revelation, it has to be a war first before we have an area of peace in the kingdom. So Yahshua is going to have to go to war first. Here it is, right here. It's a time for war and a time for peace. What advantage has he who works in that which he has a laborer, or he did as a laborer? Verse 10, I have seen the task which Elohim has given to the sons of men to be humbled by it. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has set eternity in their hearts, without which man cannot find out the work that Elohim makes from the beginning even to the end. Very key. Verse 12, I know that there is no good in them, but for a man to rejoice to do good in his life. And also, every man that eats and drinks and sees good in his labor, it is the gift of Yahweh. Here's the kicker. I know that, verse 14, I know that whatever Elohim does, it shall be forever. Nothing is to be added to it, and nothing is to diminish from it. And the Elohim does this so that they will fear before him. So there's an awe that should happen for the fact that we don't know when these things are going to happen. But like Yahshua said, we need, or I think it was Peter wrote, that you be found what? Blameless and without spot. Because
That's
we don't
right.
know when these things are going to pop off.
Right.
Again, only the Father knows this. So it's best for us to be mindful that we need to make sure that we're on our P's and Q's, as they say, because we don't know what's going to happen. But if you keep reading on, in verse 15, it says, that which has been is already is, that which is to be, it already has been. The Elohim seeks that was gone by. And again, I saw under the sun, at the place of justice, wickedness is there. And at the place of righteousness, wickedness is there. I said in my heart, the Elohim shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there should be a time for every good purpose and for every good work. I'll stop there. But it sums up some of what you're saying because of the timing. And the fact that there will be a time for these things, war and peace.
And we are to watch for these things. Yes, Tom?
I so praise Yahweh because so often I'm going to raise my hand, perhaps too often, being too chatty. I'm going to point to a scripture I just heard a while ago. Tom, got you covered. I'm already going to have someone go to Ecclesiastes 3. And here we are there going through this. It's so beautiful here where it points out in verse 11 of Ecclesiastes 3, he, Yahweh, has made everything beautiful in its season or time. Also, he has set the world, and the original Hebrew is the word for eternity. He has set eternity in our heart. That's something beyond our imagination. Once it's something that never, ever, ever, never, ever ends. And yet, we are to meditate on that, I think, and realize that all this is happening, whether we're not able and we're not really supposed to know the details of the exact moment of the second coming, but we can happily be transcendent in our thinking and meditation and expectation that we have had eternity set in our hearts, that we can look forward to the power, the Bible says, of an endless life for Yahweh's children.
Like I said, we do not know the day or the time or the hour. But we are told again to watch for the signs. And what we do know is when certain things happen, it will happen quickly. Whenever it does happen, we're supposed to be ready for it.
He says you'll see certain
The signs, you'll know that it mentions the season, that summer is
Near.
even at the doors. It does mention summer there, interestingly enough.
So again, we've discussed how knowing how his return is a great thing to know because it has to do with protecting us from deception. There's a couple of verses in Acts 1 when we were there a while ago. I forgot to read. I want to read these very quickly. Back to Acts 1 because I meant to read these a while ago and I guess I got a little ahead of myself. Acts 1, I'm going to pick it back up in verse 9. I'm going to go through verse 11. when the disciples had just asked Yahshua about, are you going to bring the kingdom now? And he tells them, it is not for you to know, verse 7, know the seasons which the Father has put in his own authority, verse 9. Now when he had spoken these things, while they watched, he was taken up out of a cloud. He was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. Imagine, a cloud. He went, and while they looked steadfastly toward heaven, as he went up, behold, two men stood by him in white apparel. And he said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand gazing up into heaven? This same Yahshua, who was taken up from you into heaven, will so come up in like manner as you saw him go up into heaven. Now, he was going up it says here in Acts he went up on a cloud. But what do the clouds all symbolize? They symbolize a chariot, and he had a big chariot ride in front of him, and he had armies, and he had quite a bit of an entourage. If he's going to come back in the same way he went up, he had an entourage. He had a cavalry escort up into heaven, if you will. He didn't call Uber. He didn't float up into heaven like hippie Jesus does in the movies, right? You know, when his eyes glaze over like he's stoned and he's...
Yeah, right, here we go.
We've seen that, haven't we, in the movies?
I've experienced it, I'm sad to say.
Because he went up in the same manner as Elijah, did he not? Yeah, he did. Because that was the type of Yahshua when he went up. Sandra, did you have your hand up? Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you had your hand up. So we know he went up. He's going to return in the same way he went up. We know how he went up because we're told how he's going to come back. And it's line on line, precept on precept. It's how we know this. We just did that. Yes, Daniel.
Was you gonna also read verse 12 there?
Verse 12, I could. All right, then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount, which is called Olivet, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath day's journey. When they entered in, they went up into the upper room where they had been staying. Peter, James, John, Andrew, Philip, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, James the son of Alphaeus, and Simon the Zealot, and Judas the son of James. All these continued with one accord in prayer and supplication with the women, Miriam, the mother of Yahshua, and all his brothers. Okay.
Hallelujah. Oh, I just was wanting 12, because that's what the connection I was making earlier with the
Okay.
Mount of Olives.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Now, what has this got to do with Passover? Because so far we've done a little line on line, precept on precept. We've been exploring the types, line on line, precept on precept, and now we've just started a little bit of this is the pattern, and we're going to do some more of this is the pattern. Because let's back up to Exodus 12. When he first came for a judgment against the nation. When did Yahshua do this? On Passover. It's in Exodus 12.
That's right. Sent the destroyer.
Exodus 12, verse 1. I'm not going to read all of it, but I'm going to jump through some relevant verses here. The first Passover. Exodus 12, verse 1. Now Yahweh spoke unto Moses and Aaron in the lands of Egypt. And they said, This shall be the beginning of your months, and in the first month of the year to you. Going forward to verse 12. For I will pass through the land of Egypt on that night, that is the Passover. I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And against all the mighty ones of Egypt I will execute judgment, because I am Yahweh. Fast forward to verse 23. For Yahweh will pass, this is Moses addressing the elders, for Yahweh will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the two doorposts, Yahweh will pass over the door and not allow the destroyer to come near your houses to strike you. Let's fast forward. Verse 24, and you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. Let us fast forward to verse 29. And it came to pass at midnight that Yahweh struck all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat in the dungeon, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. So we have the first time right here. The first of such a visitation is Yahshua's return, is on Passover.
Was Pharaoh himself a firstborn?
Evidently not.
No.
Evidently not. Because he survived this. So evidently he was not. Yes, Tom.
I see the remarkable contrast between the cruelty of the edict to have all the male, all ALL Hebrew babies given to the crocodile god to be thrown in the river Nile. But with happening with this situation, it was only, by contrast, the firstborn of the Egyptians who would end up having no Pesach. The word there for Passover doesn't mean he just flies over. It means to protect. And he protected those when the death angel came through Goshen. Protected those that had the blood on the doorposts and the lintels. And yes, it went on by. But Pesach means, if you'll check it out in Hebrew, it means our protection. Yahshua is our protection, as he was for those Israelites that went into their homes as instructed and waited when the death angel came through Goshen.
Well, let's read verse 30, because I think this is going to add a little, may help add a little interest, such a flavor to this. So Pharaoh rose in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians, for there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where there was not one dead. Now, we see again in the movies about Passover, particularly in the Ten Commandments, and I think there's another movie that does something very similar, where this green fog comes oozing over,
Right.
and people just, and it's not like it happened. This did not happen quietly, because remember these people rose up in the middle of the night, screaming, crying over the great calamity. Can we possibly conclude, maybe, just maybe, perhaps, Yahshua, when the death angel come through, he come in, say with a few horses making a ruckus, making a ruckus, striking evil? That would be consistent with the pattern. That would be consistent with the pattern we've seen and we read about in our study on Ezekiel. It would be consistent with what we just read in Acts and Revelation. To do so quietly would be different from, would not be within the pattern. It would deviate from the pattern. Because we have something very similar happening again. A little bit later, let's fast forward to Joshua, please. Let's go to Joshua 6. This is concerning the destruction of Jericho. the destruction of Jericho, Joshua 6. Now, let's just take it from the top. Now Jericho, verse 1, now Jericho was securely shut up because of the children of Israel. No one went out, no one came in. And Yahweh said unto Yahshua, said unto Joshua, see, I have given Jericho into your hand, its king and the mighty men of valor. You shall march around the city, all of your men of war. You shall go around the city once, and you will do this on 6 days. Then the priest shall bear 7 trumpets, ram's horns before the ark, but on the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priest shall blow the trumpets. And it will come to pass, when they make a long blast with a ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, that all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat. And the people will go up, every man straight before him. And Joshua the son of Nun called the priest and said to them, take the ark of the covenant. He gives them the same instructions he just got from Yahweh. And they do so. Before here, I meant to read a short reading out of verse 5. Can we hold on here just a minute? Because it tells us exactly when this happens. In verse 5. Let's pick it up in verse 10. Yeah, chapter 5. I meant to start here. It's my fault. We'll pick it back up in chapter 6 momentarily, but I meant to start here in chapter 5. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal, and they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight in the plain of Jericho. And they ate the produce of the land on the day after the Passover. The unleavened bread and parched grains that very same day. And the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land. The children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. So this is right on the heels of them keeping the Passover.
Right.
No more than they keep the Passover. What happens? They get instruction. Joshua gets instructions from Yahweh. He passes them on to the priest about what to do. Every day they march one time around Jericho. Then on the final day, it was doomed. Let's pick it back up in verse 15, please. Chapter 6. But it came to pass on the 7th day that they rose early, about the dawning of the day, and they marched around the city 7 times in the same manner. And on that day, they marched around the city 7 times. And the 7th time it happened, when the priest blew the trumpets, that Joshua said to the people, shout, for Yahweh has given you the city. Now the city shall be doomed by Yahweh to destruction, it and all who are in it. Only Rahab the harlot will live, and she, all in her with her household, because she hid the messengers. Rest of the chapter, they did exactly what Joshua, they and the men of war, did exactly what Joshua had told them. They destroyed the city of Jericho, and it saw a great fall, just like we saw in Babylon when we read about in Revelation. Imagine that. Is that a coincidence? I don't think so. Let us try. Can we please Acts 12? Let's try another one in Acts 12. What does Acts 12 teach us? This is about the death of Herod. Let's start in verse 1. Now about that time, Acts 12, verse 1, because the short reading here will help give us a little context. Now about that time, Herod the king stretched out his hand to harass some from the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. And because he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to seize Peter also. Now this was during the feast of unleavened bread. So when he had him arrested, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 squads of soldiers to keep him, intending to bring him before the people after Passover. Now, verse 5 on through verse 19 just talk about Peter's time in the penitentiary and Herod's jail. And he's freed by an angel. Now verse 20. Now Herod had been very angry with the people of Tyre and Sidon, but they came to him with one accord. Having made Blastus the king's personal aide, their friend, they asked for peace, because their country was supplied with food by the king's country. So on a set day, Herod, arrayed in his royal apparel, sat down on his throne, and he gave an oration to them. And the people kept shouting, "Oh, the voice of a God, not a man! Oh, the voice of the gods, but not a man!" Immediately, an angel of Yahweh struck him, because he did not give glory unto Yahweh. And as he was eaten by worms, and he died. Herod gets his own visitation. And it's funny, it's just right after the Passover.
Yeah.
He's visited by a destroyer. Imagine that. Anyone have any question or comment? Oh, Tom, I figured you would.
Yahweh is so stratified, or there's a tiered situation. It's one thing to be a sinner. David of Israel, the beloved, was all manner of things that he did. Bathsheba, Uriah the Hittite, was so poor, he was a bloody man. But he was never a blasphemer, in the sense that he was never an idolater. This is dealing with flat-out, full-bore idolatry.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that is particularly because one of his names or titles is jealous, taking away from his reputation. First and great commandment begins really with, "I am Yahweh your Elohim." That's a commandment, we understand that. "And therefore you shall have no other El before me." Tell with idolatry. No wonder the Apostle John says, excuse me, "My little children, run away, flee from idols," because they could really do major damage. And apparently they're particularly offensive to Yahweh.
Anyone else? Yahweh will not be mocked.
Yeah.
So we see that Herod's death, he got a visitation from Yahweh right on the heels of Passover. Can we try, please? We got a little bit of time. Let us try 2 Chronicles. Second Chronicles 29. Second Chronicles 29. We're going to see what the story of, or the account of Hezekiah has to do with this. Now Hezekiah became king when he was 25. This is second. This is 2 Chronicles 29 and verse 1. Hezekiah became the king when he was 25 years old. He reigned 29 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Abijah, the daughter of Zechariah. And he did what was right in the sight of Yahweh, according to all that his father David had done.
And that chapter again was
2 Chronicles 29.
29. 20 years.
In the following verses, he gathers up the Levites and he confesses the sins, their sins, and the sins of the people. And he gives the Levites instructions to clean up the temple, and to repair the temple and restore of temple worship. Because the account of Hezekiah is, in fact, an amazing study in of itself, because it's an amazing parallel between how Hezekiah serves as a type of Yahshua. And especially in Yahshua's role as a king. Chapter 30. Verse 1. And Hezekiah sent to all Israel and Judah, and he wrote letters to Ephraim and Manasseh, that they should come to the house of Yahweh at Jerusalem, to keep the Passover, to Yahweh of Israel, to Yahweh El Shaddai of Israel. For the king and his leaders and all the assembly in Jerusalem had agreed to keep the Passover in the second month. For they could not keep it at the regular time, because a sufficient number of priests had not consecrated themselves, nor had the people gathered together at Jerusalem. And the matter pleased the king and all the assembly. Because we need to remember, what are we told about the second Passover? If you're unclean, if you'd become ritually or spiritually unclean, and you were traveling away on a journey. Now these people weren't necessarily on a physical journey, but how about a spiritual journey in return? Let's consider this. I think the issue of a spiritual journey would apply here, as Hezekiah seems to have wisely perceived. Because what had happened all before that, before his reign? They were ruled over by a couple of bad kings, weren't they? Bad king. A couple of bad kings. The temple had gone into ruin and fallen into disrepair. He sends Levites to look. Hezekiah had in his heart to do what was right. He sends priests, Levites, to go through the temple, repair. They find the law. Hey, what's this thing? Hey, what's this thing? They look it up. Oh my goodness, it's the law. It's the Torah. So Hezekiah starts to put things right. So they just come out of an adventure, a spiritual journey from idolatry, the worship of other beings, other things, other gods, if you will. False beings. God taking up the idolatry of the nations around them, worship them. They had it. So Hezekiah had to take the physical trash and physical junk out of the temple. What did Yahshua do? He made a whip and he drove bankers and money changers and people selling animals out of the temple. Saw Daniel cracking a whip in the back. Let's see, so he sends letters out, verse 6. Then the runners went through all Israel and Judah with letters from the king and his leaders, and he spoke according to the command of the king. Children of Israel, return to Yahweh, El Shaddai, of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, and return with a remnant of you who have escaped from the hand of the king of Assyria. So we have to remember, the king of Assyria was making a march at this time. He had gone through the land of Israel and conquered it. Verse 8, he tells them to quit being so stiff-necked, that Yahweh may accept them and receive them. Remember, this is all centering around Passover so far. Verse 9, for if you return to Yahweh, your brethren and your children will be treated with compassion by those who led them captive, so they may come back to this land. He was going to change the hearts of the Assyrians to let them go, that he may come back to this land. For Yahweh is gracious and merciful. He will not turn his face from you if you return to him. So if you return to him, Yahweh was still going to receive them back. So the runners passed from city to city, through the country of Ephraim and Manasseh, as far as Zebulun. But they laughed at them and mocked them, just like they mocked Yahshua's disciples when he sent them out 2 by 2 in a lot of places, didn't they? Just like Yahweh's prophets were mocked. Yes, Daniel.
I think Ezekiel 39.
Hmm?
I think Ezekiel chapter 39,
Mm-hmm.
1 through 7, goes really well.
You want to read it?
Can you do it from the mic?
Okay, okay, hold your place here.
Oh,
Ezekiel what?
39.
39. The first 7 verses, all right?
1 through 7. And
All right.
And then
Oh.
22. 1
Oh.
through 7 and then drop down to 22.
And then go to 22, okay. So hold your place, 2 Chronicles.
Sorry, I thought you were done there.
And you, Ezekiel 39, and you, son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, thus says Yahweh El Shaddai, behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshach, and Tubal. And I will turn you around and lead you on, bring you up from the far north, bring you up against the mountains of Israel. Then I will knock the bow out of your hands, out of your left hand, and cause the arrows to fall out of your right hand. You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops and the peoples who are with you. And I will give you to the birds of prey of every sort, to the beasts of the field to be devoured. Just like we read it in Revelation. Imagine that. You shall fall in the open field, for I have spoken, says Yahweh. And I will send fire on Magog and those who live in security in the coastlands. And they will know I am Yahweh. And I will make my holy name known in the midst of the people, of my people Israel. And I will not let them profane my holy name any more. And the nations shall know that I am Yahweh, the Holy One of Israel. Then drop down to verse 22, you said? That's verse 21. I will set my glory amongst the nations, and I'll set my glory among the nations. All the nations shall see my judgment, which I have executed in my hand, which I have laid upon them. Verse 22. So the house of Israel will know that I am Yahweh, their Elohim, from that day forward.
That's that robe dipped in blood we read about earlier.
Well, that's because he's been out to battle. He's been out fighting,
Take care of some business.
taking care of business. Thank you, Daniel. Back to 2 Chronicles 30.
That's part of the reconciliation as
Mhm.
well.
Verse 11, nevertheless, some from Asher, Manasseh, and Zebulun humbled themselves, and they came to Jerusalem. They also Also the hand of Elohim was on Judah to give them singleness of heart to obey the command of the king and the leaders at the word of Yahweh. Now many people with a very great assembly gathered at Jerusalem to keep the feast of unleavened bread in the 2nd month. They arose and took away the altars that were in Jerusalem. They took down all the incense altars and cast them into the brook of Kidron. And they slaughtered the lambs. They slaughtered the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the 2nd month. And the priests and the Levites were ashamed and sanctified themselves and brought the burnt offerings to the house of Yahweh. Who was at least partly responsible for leading them to idolatry in the first place?
King.
The king, followed by
Right.
priests and the Levites. Imagine that. This is the pattern. Verse 21, so the children of Israel who were present at Jerusalem kept the feast of unleavened 7 days with great gladness, and the Levites and the priests praised Yahweh day by day, singing unto Yahweh, accompanied by loud instruments. So it wasn't some quiet little, softy tune by James Taylor that they were playing. No, they were playing loud instruments.
Curtis,
Yes.
at the beginning, you started with Matthew 24 and Mark 13, talking about no one knows the day or the hour.
Yes.
Well, what would you say if someone said, well, it says we're not supposed to know the day or the hour, but we can figure out the year?
I'd be real careful around that.
Thank you.
I'd want some salt. I'd say, pass me the salt, please, Daniel. Yes, Carlos.
Oh, yeah. As just food for thought as a
Go ahead.
alternative thought here. So something similar happened in the days of Noah when there was a judgment. Noah knew there was a judgment that was going to come. He had no idea when it was going to take place. He just knew it was going to be within 120 years, within a certain generation. As the time came closer, it was then revealed to him, right? Like 7 days or so.
Mm-hmm. You're correct.
Yahshua, correct, he did not know the time and the hour, but he knew the time frame of this judgment.
Mm-hmm.
It is my belief that after the ascension, things would be revealed to him. And so what I see is throughout the scriptures, nobody knows, he doesn't know. After he ascends, then the message that is given to the apostles is, it's near, it's at hand. Even the book of Revelation starts with, even those who pierce me shall see. And at the end of Revelations, you have, do not seal the book, for the time is at hand. Just an alternative thought
All right.
about the judgment. That, yes, you're right, he did not know, but after the ascension, it's my belief that it was revealed to him. Correct.
Anyone else? Okay. Back to Hezekiah. Hezekiah makes all the sacrifices, his offerings, strikes up the band real loud, makes his reforms. Now this is not exactly on Passover, but nonetheless, it's kind of an indirect add into Passover, if you will, but then shortly after these deeds, chapter 32, remaining in 2 Chronicles, chapter 32, verse 1. After these deeds of faithfulness, so right after Hezekiah's big celebration, keeping the second Passover, enter stage left, our villain. After these deeds of faithfulness, Sennacherib, enter stage left, our villain, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came and entered Judah, and he encamped against the fortified cities, thinking to win them over to himself. And Hezekiah saw Sennacherib had come, that his purpose was to make war against Jerusalem. He consulted with the leaders and commanders to stop the water from the springs which are outside the city, and they helped him. And after that, fast forwarding a little bit, Sennacherib makes his boast against Yahweh. Verse 10, Sennacherib, king of Assyria. And what do you trust that you remain under siege in Jerusalem? Does not Hezekiah persuade you to give yourselves over to die by famine and by thirst, saying, well, Yahweh is going to deliver us from the hand of the king of Assyria? Has not the same Hezekiah taken away his high places and his altars and commanded Judah and Jerusalem, saying, you shall worship before one altar and burn incense on it? Is it just me, or is he starting to sound like some of the quote-unquote friends of Job? Remember, he said, well, he took all of Yahweh's high places down. Who's it? No. Whose high places did he take down? The ones of all the false deities they had been worshiping. That's the ones he took down. Verse 13. Do you not know that I and my fathers have done to the peoples of other lands? Were the gods of the nations of those lands in any way able to serve or deliver their lands out of my hand? Who was there amongst all the gods of the nations that my father early destroyed that could deliver his people from my hand? And that your Elohim should be able to deliver you from my hand? Now therefore, don't let Hezekiah deceive you or persuade you like this. And don't believe him. For no Elohim of any nation or kingdom was able to deliver his people from my hand or the hand of my fathers. Now how much less will your Elohim deliver you from my hand? Verse 17, he also wrote letters to revile Yahweh, the mighty one of Israel, and speak against him, saying, as the mighty ones of the nations of the other lands have not delivered their people from my hand, so the mighty one of Hezekiah will not deliver his people from my hand. Some pretty serious talk. On the heels of that, a death angel is sent out. He strikes 185,000 men of the Assyrian army, all dead. A great parallel of what we just read in Revelation 19, parallel to what we just read in Ezekiel 39. And this on the heels of Israel, Judah, keeping the second Passover. And Hezekiah's command, Hezekiah, the type of Yahshua. So I think we got a good idea of the parallel, a type of how Yahshua's final return has its place with the Passover, and how Passover offers its own unique piece on what will happen upon the Messiah's return. And the other holy days, the other high days we keep, will have their own unique piece as well. Yahweh willing, we will study them as well in the future. If there is no question or comment, all right, Tom, one last comment.
There's a parallel between what you read in Revelation about the mark of the beast, the number and the name of the beast, in the forehead and in the hand. If you'll quickly, or I say quickly if you don't able to turn to Exodus 13, the children are spoken of as asking the parents. In verse 8 of Exodus 13, and you shall show your child or your son, it says this including daughters, in that day, saying, this is done because of that which Yahweh did unto me when I came forth out of Mitzrayim, out of tribulation. And it shall be for a sign unto you upon your hand, and for a memorial between your eyes, that Yahweh's instruction, his Torah, may be in your mouth. For the strong hand has he brought you forth out of tribulation or misery in Egypt. And I believe that's a parallel for what we're facing in the last days. And it's right all bundled in with the days of unleavened bread and the Passover.
Yes, it is. But we're out of time, so we'll conclude here, and we will have Johann up for the final song.